We are excited to have Katherine Pakradouni today. And she is an LA-based native plant horticulturist. She's been doing native plant horticulture work for more than 15 years for Theodore Payne, for the LA County Parks Foundation. She's currently working for the Santa Monica Mountains Fund on the Wallace Annenberg Wildlife Crossing project. And she has also, not that she's not doing enough, but she also has her own small business, Seed to Landscape. And so I'm gonna let her tell you more about microforests in LA, and we're very excited. So welcome, Katherine.
Hello, everybody. I am going to share my screen. For those of you who've never met me, Orchid did a wonderful intro. I'm a native plant horticulturist. I've done everything from designing native landscapes, maintaining, installing, doing garden design, to working in retail nurseries, to developing multiple nurseries, growing plants from seed, collecting seed, and kind of have a very full circle understanding of native plants and the kind of native ecology. And it's how I like to do a lot of my projects. And I had a very good opportunity to work on something called a microforest. And I'm sharing my screen here and trying to get it big enough. Oh gosh, hold on, I need to move people. Why isn't it? There we go.
Yeah, so we want to pick the smallify.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, and I don't want this.
Yeah, so you have to come to the more and pick hide.
Hide video pen?
Hide floating controls.
Boom. Okay.
And you want to click this out of here.
So many things.
Yeah.
So many things.
Yeah, if you drag that off somewhere.
Okay, we'll just put that in the top corner. Okay. Thank you guys for bearing with me. So I had, actually I want to ask a few questions to some of the people, both on Zoom and the people in here. I want you to think back to when you were in 4th or 5th grade. So elementary school. I won't say that was a long time ago for everybody, but it is something just kind of take back into your head who you were in elementary school. And if somebody approached you in elementary school and said, do you know what a coastal sage scrub habitat is? How many of you, by show of hands, would have known what that meant? So nobody. I don't know if anybody on Zoom has raised their hand, but what about oak walnut woodland plant community? Anybody? Chaparral plant community? Nobody. How many of you, if somebody said, what's a forest, would have known roughly what that was? Almost every single one of us. So the concept of the forest as being an ecosystem that has trees, that supports life, is something that's universal, and mostly across the world, we all kind of understand what that means. So what if I could tell you that we could plant coastal sage scrub and chaparral habitats, which lend themselves to oak walnut woodlands all around LA, for all the people who know what a forest is. They don't have to know what a coastal sage scrub habitat is. They don't have to know about native plants. They just have to be excited about the concept of a forest, and in this case, a microforest or a mini forest or a pocket forest or a tiny forest. So that was the introduction to my work doing this microforest, was being given the task to implement this microforest technique in LA for the first time. So to understand where the origins of the microforest come from, you have to be introduced to a gentleman. Hello, there we go. This gentleman right here. So say hello to Akira Miyawaki. Akira Miyawaki was a Japanese ecologist and botanist in Japan. He developed a method of rapid indigenous forest creation, which became known worldwide as the Miyawaki method. So Mr. Miyawaki passed away a few years ago, but his work has traveled the globe and become really, really inspirational to a lot of people. So what is the Miyawaki method? The Miyawaki method involves the randomized planting of indigenous trees and shrubs, which were all grown from local, regionally appropriate seeds of that particular area, wherever it's being planted. And there are 4 distinct layers. There's your canopy tree layer, which is often a climax species, takes the longest to actually achieve that layer. Faster growing tree species, sub-trees, which are slightly smaller than regular trees, and then shrub layer. And on the whole, we're talking about like 70% or so of trees and maybe like 30% of sub-trees and shrubs. It involves, his particular methodology involves heavy tilling and amending of the soil to make a lot of kind of air spaces and allow the roots to grow really deep and really quickly. And we're talking about planting these saplings of trees about a foot apart from each other, that close. And with the premise that you're not planting any 2 trees that are the same species or the same heights next to one another. So things that are smaller can get shaded by the things that are slightly bigger without them competing for the exact same, horizontal space. In the long term, what ends up happening is you have the faster growing species be dominant in the beginning, and over time, the larger climax species take dominance, and you naturally lose some of the species in that understory. So you have this natural succession, and when a tree dies in that system, you actually leave it. You let it decompose, you let it become food for other life. And so it's basically speeding up this natural succession process. And so to give you some examples of his method and what it looks like. So this is an example of one of his forests. And you can see he does these installations in highly industrial areas in Japan. And on the left, you see it at planting. Tiny, saplings planted really, really close together. 10 years later is what you're seeing on the right. So supposedly, his method will create a forest in 20 years, what Mother Nature might take 200 years to do. So that level of competition, that quick shading, that quick weed suppression because of that shade, that level of leaf litter that then feeds the soil underground is what makes this a very fast and effective technique. And so here's another example. This is a 50-year-old indigenous forest in Japan planted in the same way. And then the cool thing about this particular method is that it's scalable in both directions. Doesn't matter how big or how small, you can do something that's 100 acres or 100 square feet, and you can use roughly the same methodology. So this is an example of that same Miyawaki method being employed in the Netherlands. So again, we've got Japan, temperate environment, Netherlands, temperate environment. So far we're seeing that this is something that works in a temperate environment. So here we got in India, this is being employed by in particular, this particular company is called A Forest, and a gentleman by the name of Shubhendu Sharma has really scaled the ability to do these forests in India. And he, again, so we have not a temperate environment anymore, but definitely still a higher water environment than LA, but it's being done extensively in India, extensively in parts of temperate Europe. And now we're in the United States. We've had it done. There's been these Miyawaki forests done on the East Coast. There was a New York Times article that was featuring one. I forget if it was in Massachusetts. I forgot the state. But I wanted to highlight this one in particular. This one was done in Washington State. So we're getting a little closer to California than Japan, like from Japan. And so this one was done by a forest maker by the name of Eaton Bryson by Natural Urban Forests. And he created this one on a native tribal land by the Yakama Nation. So he created it for the intention that it's also a gathering location and ethnobotanical space for the tribe. So still not Mediterranean environments so far. So it's been, like I said, it's been done. It's starting to get really popular, and it's just barely making its way kind of to this West Coast Southern California realm. And so I was given the opportunity to do the Miyawaki method in LA. And my first instinct was, no, it doesn't work in LA. We shouldn't do it in LA. We don't have the kind of climate and environment in LA. And so when I did a little bit more digging, I wanted to see if there was any other precedent in the Mediterranean where this was used. And so there was one trial that was done in Sardinia, which is an island off the coast of Italy. So still an island environment, not quite as harsh as where we're at here, but still Mediterranean. And so what they did was they attempted this method in a sloped region where their previous reforestation efforts have repeatedly failed. And so they tried the Miyawaki method, and they found that even though there was high mortality over the course of like a decade, which was expected, a certain amount of natural succession happens and a certain amount of mortality happens, they did find that compared to their other regular reforestation methods, this one was superior. There were much more standing trees and much more diversity than in their previous attempts. So that was relatively hopeful. But again, it was in a very like restoration context where I don't think they did have very much water, or it was a little unclear as to what kind of support the forest might have had in the beginning. But still very, very hopeful to hear that it was better than everything else they'd been doing. So more recently, at the same time that I was developing the first one for LA in Australia, they were also in another Mediterranean climate, also in a more like bushland environment, developing one in the west coast of Australia here. And so they did the same kind of method. You can see they got drone footage there. They did it at a school, incorporated this in part of the school, education curriculum. And so again, we have another Mediterranean climate, hot kind of environment, not that different from Southern California. And so then it was up to me to develop what was going to become LA's first one. And my first instinct, like I said, was no, this isn't going to work. Not in that one size fits all standardized way. I had done enough native plant horticulture work. I'd seen native plants enough. I'd hiked enough to know that the environment here are not the same as the environments in Japan and in other parts of like temperate Europe and even other parts of the United States. However, we got to pick this site here at the Betty Davis Park in Griffith Park as our pilot park. And so if you want to see, just for context, where we're at, we are near the LA River. We are across the river is Griffith Park, chaparral and oak woodland kind of environment. And even though we are next to the LA River, we are not this wonderful thing, which is a wonderful riparian forest and woodland, which it would have been if the LA River was not a concrete channel. And so I couldn't look to this. I couldn't look to history to say this is the kind of forest we should plant there, because the likelihood of water ever reaching over into that park or spilling over, providing that kind of seasonal wetness, it was slim to none. And so the other areas I had to look at were across the river. Shrub dominant chaparral and our beautiful oak forests and woodlands. So those became the inspiration for the plant palette and just the general adjustments and changes that I had made for adapting this method and using it as inspiration for LA. So I've done a lot of hiking. I see in the Santa Monica Mountains, for instance, how close oaks can grow together and not kill each other or not be starved for sunlight and die and not make it. And I also see how close they can be when they do get starved for sunlight and not make it. And so I used some of those averages of seeing, how close are these two, how far are these two, how healthy are these two, to come up with a different kind of spacing pattern for this particular forest that we were going to do. The other thing I really did like and appreciate that this method talks about is that dense planting. And a lot of times people think, oh, you're planting too dense. We're all gardeners. We're all native plant gardeners. I came from the native plant garden world. Native plant gardening world is plant for mature size. We're not doing that at all, guys. We're definitely not planting for mature size because It not because it's aesthetically more pleasing, but because it's quite natural, quite healthy, and in many cases really beneficial to have different kinds of plants growing together and nursing one another through their growth cycle. So this is one of my favorite little spots in the park in the Santa Monica's, where there's a coast live oak, a young one, growing in the middle, and it's growing out of a coyote brush, a chaparral mallow, a deerweed, a golden yarrow, there's sagebrush in there. There's all these other shrubs that acorn must have landed inside, got protected, nurtured, shaded, a little more moisture inside all that brush. And then when it grows out, it has all that support. Eventually we'll shade those out, and then you just have a natural succession. So there's nothing unnatural, wrong about that as far as ecosystem is concerned. Maybe from a garden design perspective, a little bit messy, but as far as the ecosystem, as far as the health of those trees that are growing to become that climax kind of species at the end, it's a really beneficial situation. So here's another example. We have a very mature oak woodland on the right, and then you have emerging, or let's say oak forest on the right. So when we say forest, we're really talking about just an environment where the trees are all touching, right? Woodland, they're a little bit more spaced out. Savanna, they're spaced out even more. So we're trying to recreate something where the trees eventually all touch. But so you see kind of an oak forest on the right, and then you see an emerging oak forest on the left. So there's lots of little baby coast live oaks popping up in all of those other native shrubs and herbaceous perennials. So that's just natural succession. So I took this off of University of Chicago. It's just one of the coolest little graphics, and I can't make one as nice as this, so credit to them. And so just to show you what, and frankly, let me just say, this was burnt in the Woolsey fire. So this park got burnt in the Woolsey fire. So this is just 5 years after the Woolsey fire. So let's say we have a fire, then pioneering species of various grasses, wildflowers, small herbaceous perennials and things start coming up, then bigger shrubs, fast growing trees, then you have your climax community that is your slower growing trees, things like oaks. That's the natural succession. So when we're working on the microforest method, we're actually planting them all at once with the idea that the faster growing ones are going to become the most dominant at first and set the stage for those slower growing ones to emerge, rather than kind of compartmentalize that and say, okay, we're only doing a grassland, we're only doing this, we're only doing that. We're doing it all, and we provide immediate habitat support for a variety of animals, and we get to watch it evolve. So this is my adaptation to that Miyawaki method. This is the LA microforest design. So same 4 layers, but with a slight difference. So we have canopy trees, we have subtrees, and we have shrubs and herbaceous perennials. The shrubs and herbaceous perennials, rather than being the minimum, or rather than being in the minority of the forest, are actually the most. We have the most shrubs and herbaceous perennials as far as quantity of plants. Why? Because our plant communities are shrub and perennial dominated. We don't have a huge variety of tree species. We have fantastic trees. They're keystone species that we always would want to include, but we don't have like 75 species of, LA native trees the way that some other countries and places do. So it's going to be dominated by this lower level of shrubs and perennials. Our subtree category is actually more like our toyon, lemonade berry, multi-trunked. Eventually they can become tree-like woody shrubs. Trees would be generally our faster growing trees, things like elderberry and black walnut. And then when we have canopy trees, those are our oaks, almost always. So we want to make sure that we have as many keystone species in there, and the oaks are essential for that. I've also made some adaptations. I don't believe in heavy tilling or excessive amending of the soil. I think compost can be useful in limited or in a certain scenario. And I think the addition of mycorrhizal inoculant, if it's locally sourced, is great if there's not any present. But that tilling of the soil that's recommended in the Miyawaki method. Number one is very cost prohibitive. It makes it so that a lot of people can't do it, or it's just inaccessible to them. Number two, it completely destroys the soil microbiome. So it's not something that I do. So that's something that I've changed. The spacing is different. So instead of every foot, we have every 2.5 feet for all the plants. And let's see if there's anything else. And I definitely maintain that growing these from local seeds, regional seeds from the area is really, really critical and as close to the project site as you can. So those were basically the two different changes. Reduction of the tree quantities, increased spacing, no heavy tilling, and an earlier weaning off of irrigation. So in Japan and in some of these other areas, they recommend like daily irrigation for like 3 years or something to that effect. No, I definitely, we've done enough native plant horticulture to know that these plants are really, really resilient and can be weaned off of irrigation much sooner. So it's about 1 to 2 years of irrigation that tapers the farther we go. So case study, this was the one at Betty Davis. So you saw the site. So now this is what we have to deal with. It is basically just like a weedy field. I just talked about not tilling. We did very minor tilling of this just to make it plantable by volunteer hands. But in the future, I might not have done that again. But we had just very common weeds. And in the future, I might even consider having cut the weeds, but like left their root systems in place. But we'll see. This was our first attempt. So we made sure just to clear every single thing. We put a pathway in the middle, which you're going to see is gone. And then the plant selection was based off of an oak woodland. I wanted to do an oak walnut woodland, but because there's a horse trail nearby, and you can see it kind of in the distance on the right, I was advised that horses, if they were to ingest any part of the oak, any part of the walnut leaves or the juglone that's present in it, it's toxic to them. So I made that kind of amendment to the plant palette to be respectful to the horse community. But we have Toyon, coffeeberry, lemonade berry, mugwort as an understory species, heartleaf kekiella, creeping snowberry as an understory, wild rose, obviously coastline oak, elderberries, which again, I wouldn't have planted as many, would have been balanced by the oak walnut woodland, or by the Southern California black walnut. But in this case, I couldn't do that. So here we have the plant placement. The plant placement is very simple. You just start with your biggest species, space those out equidistantly. Then you take the next layer and you space those in between that. Next layer, space those in between that. Next layer, fill in all the gaps, and you should roughly end up with a 2.5 feet between each plant. It's not perfect. It's not meant to be perfect. It's not meant to be a perfect grid. It should be able to be done on site. It should not be done on paper. The point of this is to make it organic, and the point of this is to make it accessible and easy for people to do. And so that's what we did. Just 2 hours before the actual planting event, I came with the plants, placed them all, and had a bit of a panic attack because they were so close, but it was okay. Then we planted with the help of the community. We had the Conservation Committee of the LA Zoo come out and help us. So we had a lot of really great hands and helpers. We watered, we heavily mulched. So that's a really important part of the microforest method, is to heavily mulch. We want to do that both for weed suppression, moisture retention, and also to start facilitating the soil, the breakdown of organic matter and the conditioning of the soil. So there they are. Isn't that cute? For those of you on Zoom, everyone is oohing and ahhing right now and laughing heartily laughing. Okay. Yeah, so somebody just asked a question for those of you on Zoom, if the mulch was sourced from Griffith Park, and yes, it was. So Reckon Parks was a fantastic partner that assisted us with this. They brought in mulch from the Griffith Park compost and mulch facility, I think. I'm pretty sure that's where they sourced it because it's nearby, and they supplied it for us. So we got to repurpose all the stuff that is yeah, you know, fallen trees and such that's processed from the park. So it stays local and free. All right. So you saw 3 months. Now we're at 11 months. Okay, I'm not hearing the who's nods. Okay, everyone who did nod. Okay, good. All right, so we got 11 months. Everything's growing really big, especially the elderberry. They're from another. Yes, that's a wonderful question. Somebody just asked what time of year it was planted. It was planted in mid-June. Oh, wow. Yes, guys. So it is 100% okay to plant in mid-June if you are very watchful and attentive over the watering and somebody's really present to do that. The warm weather really makes plants grow fast, quickly. Yes.
So how often was this area watered?
So somebody just asked how often it was watered. It was watered in the first month about every 4 to 5 days. And then by the second and third month, we went to once a week. And then we went to every 10 days for like another month or so. And then it was every 2 weeks for the next year. The other question was where the money came from, and thank you for doing that so that I could give wonderful kudos to our fantastic donors. So I was working with the LA Parks Foundation. They're the project managers of this particular project. They received a sponsorship donation from the Hancock Park Garden Club to do this project. So the Garden Club, wonderful ladies, finance this project. And so there's 11 months. Okay, next one we're going to see, all of us are hopefully not squeamish about summer dormancy. Okay, so summer dormancy happens. Okay, ooh, some people do. I love this. Okay, so summer dormancy happens, guys. And I also did not select a bunch of species. So what I was counting on was that the walnuts would be green and happy during the middle of the summer when the elderberries are starting to look not so great. And then in the wintertime, the elderberries flesh out and then the walnuts go dormant. So we have this really beautiful yin and yang effect that they were balancing each other out, providing some visual interest at different times of the year. Couldn't do the walnuts. Therefore, we have a little bit more pronounced summer dormancy in this particular forest, which can be remedied with the inclusion of more summer blooming species and fewer summer dormant species. But for this case, they did their thing. They didn't look like the most gorgeous in the summer. However, they all survived. And look at what they look like yesterday. So the pathway's gone, guys. There is no pathway. Don't put a pathway unless it's 10 feet wide. I think 10 feet would work. 4 feet did not work. So everything's incredibly full. Not only is everything really full, things are fruiting. So there's tons of coffee berries on the little coffee berries that I had in there, which tells me that they're getting enough sun, they're getting enough resources. Even though they're all quite crowded together, they're not suffering, at least so far. And I also wanted to make sure to include enough species that can take that range of sun and shade, so that if they're in full sun for that first year or two, they're going to tolerate it and be fine, but they can also tolerate it once the trees get big enough that they get shaded out. Yes, question. So everything is hand watered. So hand watered with a hose for about 45 minutes. With a beautiful dram water breaker nozzle, which is my favorite thing on the planet. And there was not a hose bit, but a quick coupler valve access that the park made sure was close enough to this site. So watering, unless you're gonna rely on a fantastic rain year, and guarantee you're gonna get just like phenomenal rains for a really long time. Like last year, we probably could have planted that, say if we planted it in November and then just like never watered it, we probably would have an established forest by now, just from the amount of rain we got last winter. So this is the backside. Just wanted to show you the back. And that's from a distance, which was also the photo on the entrance, on the first slide. All right. So, yes, another question. So this is fenced only for the first couple of years. So the premise being that you don't want certain critters going in there. I'll tell you more about that. And you also don't want people going in there. So it's a park, people play ball and, so we just don't want people squashing it. We could have removed the fence probably after the first year without issue. Right now it's still up there. It's gonna be taken down this spring. And another question.
Oh, I have a statement and a question.
Statement and a question.
So the statement is, kind of a question. I assume that this was formerly private, right?
Yes, the area was formerly riparian prior to the channelization of the river.
Okay, so my experience of formerly riparian is that there's just more nutrients in the soil than there is anywhere else.
The other comment was that she feels that the former riparian areas have higher nutrient levels in the soil naturally compared to other areas.
And then here's my other question. So the question about the statement is, then I have another question. The question about the statement is, would you modify this for an area that had not?
The question is whether I would have modified this for an area that had not been riparian, formerly a historically riparian. And I would say no. So it was pretty compacted soil, pretty silty, but very compact. Kind of like silty sandy. It only had mulch and some weeds growing on it for a really long time. And I didn't know what kind of response I was going to even get from the plants, because it didn't seem like it was going to be really well, like it didn't seem very well structured at all. And so I'll talk a little bit more about how I think the plants helped in structuring that soil. And I think it might have been even easier in many cases on the other side of the river, maybe up on a hillside, like in Griffith Park, because I think that there's just a little bit more space for the roots and stuff to go. There's just like better drainage in general. But I didn't see a negative or an excessive positive. I think that growth rate would have happened in another kind of soil as well. But this is all also very experimental. And so I'll get into what other cool experiments we're doing, because we're trying to figure out what different environments this can be planted in, so that we can gather that kind of data and answer those kind of questions.
Then I do have another question.
Another question.
So you said 10% trees, but if we consider the toyon and or shrubby trees,
Yeah.
the toyon and the 11 acre.
Yeah. If you call those trees, yeah.
If you call all those trees, here's the math portion. How much percentage more in trees?
It's like 35, 65. I have to double check. It's more than 10. 10 was like the first two layers, the canopy trees and the regular trees, or those two layers. And then I was counting shrubs from subtrees and down. But if we include subtrees as trees, then I believe it's going to be like 35% is that. Yeah. And other questions?
Okay.
Yeah.
Couple questions? Yeah.
Yes. We're going to do chat questions next.
Yeah, first question in the chat was, person sees the amount of spurge in one photo.
Yes.
Only surviving on the outside perimeter.
Yes, so most of the weeds are only surviving on the outside perimeter. I will say also, just a disclaimer, I have not been the one maintaining this forest, even though I'd love to. Technically the first 2 years, there's supposed to be very, very diligent weed management. So you're not supposed to have any weeds for the first 2 years. But yes, there is a mound of spurge, and most of the weed activity is on the perimeter. Very few that are occurring inside, and I should have actually brought you some, actually, maybe there is a little bit of an image where you can see inside. It's a little too shady, too crowded, too messy, frankly, on the inside for a lot of weeds. So that's kind of nice. But there were very targeted volunteer events for the first 2 years, where there was like a lot of hands just making sure to, like, on a massive scale, rip out as many weeds as possible. But I do think could have been done a little bit more.
So another person in chat asked, so tilling was beneficial there?
Tilling was only beneficial for the physical ease of having volunteers dig the soil. So it was compacted to a place that I think the plants would have been okay, but it was like just the physical ease of the workday going more smoothly. That's why we did it. Normally, yeah, and planting in June is hard because there wasn't rain on it for quite a long time. And so it was very hydrophobic. Actually, we did pre-watering a few times just to get it, just to like be amenable to being worked. Is that it on the questions for chat? Okay, so we'll move on to the my super fun, happy part, which is so my biggest joy about native plant gardening and what got me into native plant gardening was the life supportive benefits of native plants and the amount of biodiversity that's supported by these native ecosystems. So within the first 6 months, and in some cases within the first 3 months, we saw a huge diversity of insect life. We had various butterflies and moths. We had lots of aphids, like tons of aphids on some of the plants, and then tons of ladybugs and tons of serpent flies and tons of all the animals and insects that eat aphids, parasitic wasps. We've had bumblebees, we've had robber flies, we've had grasshoppers, we've had beetles of various kinds. So you just automatically saw all this life coming in into this forest that you could not see in any other part of that park. In addition, what eats insects? Lots of things eat insects. We had also lots of birds, and we had lots of lizards. And in fact, within the first 6 months, there were breeding groups of western fence lizards. So we already had little clutches of baby lizards running around within the first 6 months of this little space. So not only did they identify this as an ideal habitat area for food because there's so many bugs, but also because there was enough cover to create their little hole and start to breed. Oops, sorry for tapping the microphone.
We have another question from the chat. Somebody asked, how would you handle soil with lots of clay in an alluvial layered system?
Let's get into that after. Okay. So there was a question about soil with a lot of clay. I am not a big fan of excessive amending. I think looking towards what might have been present in that environment, or what kinds of plants are tolerant of those conditions, is the best thing. And I also think there's a whole lot of just try it and see. And that's literally been my thing, is like, nobody's done this. Let's see what happens. And that's been my entire career. So I would say test out anything that is relatively clay tolerant, that isn't something that you would find on a decomposed granite slope, in the chaparral, and you might be onto something. So as far as other wildlife, so western fence lizards right away breeding. Now we've got mammals. So small mammals came in. So even though we have that beautiful fence, the bunnies stayed out, but the ground squirrels moved in, and they not only had this incredible territory to themselves, but they had it such that there was a fence keeping any predators out. So ground squirrels really made so many wonderful homes for themselves inside the forest. And in any other scenario, when there's those huge mounds of soil, and anyone who's seen a ground squirrel burrow, they don't just like make a little hole, they take out the entire contents of the planet with them, like to make space for a hole that's the size of a tennis ball. I don't know how all that soil comes out, but that's what the ground squirrels did. So there's several ground squirrel burrows with mounds of this like silty, sandy soil in the forest, undulating. So now you can't see the mulch anymore. It's just this like undulating environment. And under any other circumstances, most people would say they're destroying the landscape and they are a pest. Let's deal with them. And by deal with them, I mean kill them, or eradicate them in some form. And we did none of that. So we kept everything just as it was. And very shortly after they moved in, a wonderful discovery was made that western toads from the LA River migrated from their wonderful watery paradise. This is actually a pretty decent portion of the LA River with a lot of habitat areas. They climbed up that embankment, they crossed a concrete walking path, they went down another slope, they crossed a horse trail to go into that tiny, tiny space that you see with that small red circle. That small red circle was so prime a habitat area for some animal that had all this river, lots of little land masses in this river, and they chose that. Why did they choose that? They chose it because there was so much food for them, they could live out their whole lives. And there were so many beautiful ground squirrel burrows that they could live inside and stay protected from the sun and from drying out and from predators, because I hope ground squirrels don't eat them. And so that became a home for a completely unrelated species. So our interconnectedness and the interconnectedness of other life is a fantastically nuanced and cool thing. And more often than not, non-interference gets to reveal that. And that doesn't mean that you never interfere. It doesn't mean that in a domestic, like in a front yard that has a lot of, you're trying to do the curb appeal thing. Well, the project I'm doing is on an outskirt of a park, and there's so many opportunity areas like that can provide this kind of habitat. So the other thing, this is completely anecdotal. I don't know if this was somebody's off-leash dog. However, somebody did say they were at the microforest and a gray fox approached them. So is that possible that this small space has, again, so much life in it that it attracted one of the natural predators in the environment? Very, very possible. Is it likely? I don't know. Do I have proof of it? I do not. But the amount of that kind of like life force in less than 1,000 square feet is palpable. So so it's pretty exciting, and that was a really, really good pilot to encourage us to explore these ideas further. So I do want to make mention, we talked a little bit about soil. I do want to just bring up the soil piece a little bit, just because there's often a misconception that, lots of dense plantings, they compete with each other in a negative way. And you actually want to space things out so they have more access to nutrients. Nutrients cannot be uptaken by plants without all the other soil food web organisms, bacteria, fungi, and all of them. Those organisms eat minerals and basically when their digestive process and their life process, and then when they die, they have left behind those nutrients in a form that the roots can take up. So how do we get all those organisms to the plant's roots so that they're nearby and doing that work? It's the plants draw them to them. The plants solicit them. The plants go, hey, just like that. They go, hey, and in the process of everybody on Zoom, everyone left, okay, at that joke. So they're photosynthesizing, right? In the process of photosynthesis, they're exuding sugars to solicit those other underground organisms and bacteria and microbes to their roots. The more active roots there are in a space, the more activity happens underground, the more that soil food web is actually supported, and the more nutrients start becoming released for those plants to grow. So it is a misconception that plants are competing if they're planted next to each other. Now, if plants are the same species and they're way too close to each other and they're like competing for space, that's a different thing. And that's why this planting strategy is meant to be very little more randomized, to give plants, like you can put 2.5 feet away from a coastlive oak, you can put a mugwort, because mugwort's going to get 3 feet tall max, and the coastlive oak's going to get huge. So we're not competing in the same way. These are different plants, different heights, different survival strategies, different root systems. Maybe they solicit different kinds of organisms. And so just the more diversity you have, the healthier an environment you have, both above and below ground. And we have a hand raised.
Yeah, so when you say you're 2.5 feet apart and you start putting more plants, they're actually a lot of plants are very close to each other, right?
Yes.
Okay. And how are the trees, the oak trees?
The oak trees are slow. So the fastest thing was the elderberries. And I would say in the future, I would not plant as many elderberries so close together, not because they're not doing really well, they're doing fantastic, but they are so multi-trunked and so like large shrubby that they're some of their limbs are dropping on like the little oaks. So I think a species selection nuance is in order, but otherwise the oaks are fine. They're doing fine. They're just, you know, taking their time because they are the slowest growing and ultimately the last layer to achieve dominance in that kind of an environment. And another hand is raised. Yes.
Has this method ever been applied to sloped land?
I love that question. So this is going to answer your question. So this method has not been applied to a sloped environment until a month from now. So my newest collaborative project is a microforest at Ascot Hills Park in Northeast LA. So we are talking about a coastal sage scrub, oak, walnut, you know, kind of an environment. And the site is a south-facing, semi-sloped environment. And we are talking about a 1/4 acre project we're doing. So more than 10 times the size of the one you saw just now. We are in the process of prepping the site for a 1/4 acre. That's going to be 1,600 plants. And we are attempting this because, as I said earlier, we need to test this in a variety of soil types, in a variety of environments, a variety of aspects. We need to be able to see how replicable this is in different environments. And so this project is one that's probably one of the toughest environments you're going to find in LA. It's the toughest slope positioning. It has the highest weed pressure of any other site. It's got tons of black mustard and brome grass. It has just a lot of things not working against it in a negative sense, but it's going to be a really good example, if it's successful, of how we can do this kind of really dense restorative habitat restoration. Because one of the things that I have observed for many, many years is that habitat restorations eventually, many of them just eventually get overtaken by weeds. They eventually don't, they have the support of volunteers and stewards and for a couple years, and then in 5 years, 10 years, you go back to that site and it's back to either what it was with a couple struggling plants inside. And my purpose for doing any of these is to create something that has longevity and that is going to be able to be self-managing and self-sustaining. I hate the codependent landscape. I'm not about codependency in landscapes where it requires your constant tending just to be alive. I want it to be alive and thrive and reproduce on its own and resist weed invasion on its own. And so that's why we're attempting this, to see how well can it do that in this kind of an environment.
A couple of comments from the chat.
Comments from the chat.
One person responded to the end of the previous project saying, "So lovely to allow the space and light to fire and evolve with minimal interference."
Yes, thank you.
And then with respect to this, she asked, will there be volunteers days for this project?
So there have been some volunteer days. So we are coordinating this. This is a project that was funded by Waste Management, but we're doing it in partnership with Northeast Trees and in partnership with Loyola Marymount University. And so we have had a few volunteer days. I wish I did this talk earlier because the volunteer days up till now have been very unpleasant. I'm kidding. They've been lovely. But it's been like weeding and mulching and just kind of like hot labor, repetitive labor kind of work. We will be beginning planting mid-November with the funders and Loyola Marymount. And then if there are plants remaining, which I think there will be because we have 1,600 to plant, we're going to do like open up volunteer events.
Same person asked, another person asked, what was the method of clearing weeds and invasives at this plot? So
that's another really great question. Somebody asked if the method for clearing the weeds and invasive species. We in my learning about soil, on the whole, we want to disturb the soil as little as possible. And we want to keep roots in the soil as much as possible. But we also don't want annual weeds to be seeding everywhere. So what we did was we mowed. There was no way to hand pull all of this. We did hand pull some of the black mustard. But all the brome grass, we just used a weed whacker, mowed it down as low as we could, and then smothered with mulch on top. So we're still going to have some things that are poking up for a time, but the goal is just to make sure it just never seeds, because they're all annual weeds. And as long as we just make sure they don't seed, they'll eventually die out, decompose, add biomass and, you know, nutrients and things back into the soil. The other very, very cool component about this is that we tested the soil for mycorrhizal spores. And so mycorrhizae is for those of you who are not familiar, it's a mutualistic fungus that lives in the soil that associates with native plants. Actually, 80% of plants on Earth are mycorrhizal. But native plants really rely on it, rely on that relationship to survive really harsh conditions like drought, heat, and things like that. And so we did a soil sample, tested it, and found that this particular site, because grass, even non-native grass is mycorrhizal, mustard is not. And much of this site was dominated by brome grass. We found that the spore counts were very, very high. So we are at a major benefit, like we have a leg up at this project site, because all that fungi or fungal spores are just going to wait for their native host plants to be planted and then just give them a head start, hopefully, fingers crossed. One of the reasons why they had such a high spore count was because this was also the site of a timed mowing experiment where the grass was cut every March or April for like several years as part of an experiment with Loyola Marymount. And one of the ways that you reproduce spores commercially is actually to plant the soil with those spores with the host plant, and then stress the host. So you would cut it down really harsh or starve it of water or do something like that, and it triggers the fungus to reproduce because its host is in danger. And so this person inadvertently was doing this timed mowing experiment and repeatedly stressing the host plant, which happened in this case to be a grass, and triggering all this natural spore production in the soil. And so now we have this site in particular has a better spore count of mycorrhizal fungi than other areas of the park, even though it had very few native plants in it. Actually, there's only like a little bit of milkweed, and otherwise it's all weeds. Another question.
There was a question in chat that asked that you basically answered, will you be scraping the top layer of the soil to possibly help reduce the weed seed bank?
No, we are going to, you can just smother. And so that's some of the things that's a little bit of a challenge is we expend a ton of energy on removal. And the truth is that unless the species itself is like toxic and it really hurts the soil to have it, it's better to chop and drop, chop it down, leave it, don't let it seed. If it's a perennial, then, removing the whole thing. But for annuals, it's a matter of just, doesn't matter how many seeds are in there. If it's covered in mulch and leaf litter and eventually shaded, it's not going to be an environment that's going to allow for those weeds to take a hold. So I would say, no, we're not going to be scraping the soil at all. We're just going to keep covering it with vegetation, with leaf litter, with mulch, and all of that. And another question.
Another question from the chat. A person would love to try this on the slope in the back of his property, but has to deal with like fire department brush clearance.
Yes, so that's horrible, and I have a little answer to that on the website. In the FAQ section. But yes, unfortunately, LA Fire Department is, their brush clearance guidelines are counter ecology. They are against dense plantings. In an ideal world, they would allow these dense habitat blocks or dense microforest applications, which could be separated from one another, versus what you do see, which is limb every single tree up, don't let any other plants touch any other plants. That is one of the worst things for habitat. What kind of animal can nest? What kind of animal can seek cover or anything if everything is mowed down every year or everything is limbed up such that there's total visibility all around? So in an ideal world, we would try to change that policy to allow a certain degree of this. If you can space it past the, I don't know, 100 to 200 feet, I forgot what the threshold is. If you have the benefit of having that much property space, then you would have to put this farther out. Alternatively, trying to really make the edges of it look really, really crisp and intentional, and make sure there's like a lot of clearance around it and see if it would just be allowed. I don't know. I would love to solve some of that. And I'm actually hoping, because this park in particular is brush cleared, that we could have this kind of an experimental plot as a future talking point with fire department, and to show a model of like creating these habitat blocks separated by fire breaks. That to me is ecologically much more sound, and I think is still protective as far as potential, property damage and such. So that's the most ambitious project so far, and that's the most ambitious one in LA. And then we have the baby plants being grown at the Northeast Trees Nursery right in Ascot Hills Park. So they're literally all summer have been getting seasoned to the conditions and the environment there. And there's a beautiful little skyline of downtown there. There they are. Aren't they adorable? There's a question, yes. Thank you so much for asking that, because I forgot to mention that. So the question was if we're going to be doing surveys of wildlife before and after. And so, yes, part of the partnership with Loyola Marymount University is involving doing biodiversity surveys of both that plot, and we have a control plot of just weedy grass and weedy, weed species. So we have a control plot of the exact same size on the hillside right next to it with the same kind of conditions. And then we have the microforest plot. And so they're beginning doing their side-by-side kind of biodiversity surveys, both in person, through, direct observation, but also with experimenting with emerging technologies and in a laboratory setting with environmental DNA, which is something that's really, really fascinating. We're fingers crossed hoping that it is actually going to work for this particular project. So we would, yes, love to be able to publish the findings. And that's one of the goals, is to make sure that this is being folded into higher education and with a biodiversity focus and or ecosystem services evaluation. All right, so that's that. The other one that's coming up, very exciting because it's another first. So we had the first one ever was in Griffith Park, and then we had a second park one, but it's going to be the biggest one. That was the one at Ascot Hills that's upcoming. And then just in a couple of weeks, we are going to be planting the very first microforest in an LAUSD school. That's huge for anyone who's ever tried to do a project in an LAUSD school. So hooray! So for those of you on Zoom, everyone clapped. Sugi Project is a organization that raises funds for Miyawaki forests and pocket forests through around the world. And they funded this project for us. This is a collaboration between the school, Mid-City Prescott School of Enriched Sciences, the parent-teacher organization, a nonprofit called Mini Forest LA, and then myself with my business Seed to Landscape. So we are doing a 900 square feet pocket forest. We're replacing a lawn. We actually allowed the lawn to die over the summer, and we're going to do cardboard and mulch just on top of the mostly dead lawn, again with the goal not to excessively disturb the soil, but rather just to smother what's there and just plant directly into it. So that's exciting. And then this one is not one that is my project, but one that I want to just highlight and give a shout out. to the Malibu Foundation and Clarence and the Santa Monica Mountains Fund, who are growing the plants for it. So there's going to be the first one in the Calabasas area in a park, and it's over 3,000 square feet, I believe. So just to show you that these are starting to take off, and to try to also just build kind of a network and a community of people who are caring about these things, also talking about these things, sharing best practices, sharing observations, like, oh, hey, we did it at this park, but we didn't have good luck in this scenario, and to better inform future projects. And so one of the things that I wanted to make sure to do was to create a website that would help kind of be that resource hub of information for people who want to do this. This is something that whether you're doing a big public project or something in your backyard or wherever, you can use this website. You can go to you can read about the background. I did obviously share a ton of background today, but you can go to the Create Your Forest section. In the before you plant, there's a section where you can pick your plants, and there's a plant calculator feature. So the plant calculator, you pick a forest type, you put in your square footage, you select your species by plant layer. So we got your canopy trees, you got your other trees, subtrees, and then your shrubs, and you can just like click on them. There's a link. You can just click on the species name and you'll go to the CalScape profile for that species if you're interested in learning more, or you can literally just close your eyes and just start pressing plant. Like, you don't have to know any of these plants. And that's what I wanted to create, was something like, you don't have to know it, just pick it by layer, pick as many as you want, see how many are available at the nurseries, try to get local sourced if you can, meaning that it was grown from local seeds, and then just plant them. And you plant them, whoops, and then plant them in again, there's like a step-by-step of how to plant your canopy trees first. You'll get a species list and it'll tell you exactly how many plants to get per layer. But you plant your canopy trees first, you plant your other trees in between those, you plant, it's meant to be organic, it's meant to be easy, it's meant to be accessible. You don't have to know native plants. And then there's a whole section about how do you water, how do you take care of it, what are you supposed to do? So there's just a step-by-step, even to the point of like, hey, you're going to use a watering can. Okay, you want 5 gallons per plant. That's roughly a little over 2 watering cans, so it's trying to really make it super simple and super easy. And so I will encourage all of you to go to the website, look through it. If anything's weird on it, if you're like, this is not as easy as you're saying, or this is really confusing, or I really disagree with this, like, shoot me an email. This is meant to be an organic website that's changing based on new information, based on people's feedback. If I feel really strongly about it, I might not change what you're saying, but I do want that feedback, and I do want it to be kind of like a focus group of people who are giving good feedback information. So if you have not been to the website yet, it's lamicroforests.com. If you accidentally press lamicroforest.com, you will also go there. I bought many domains just so that people who didn't know that it's plural can still get to where they need to go. You can email me at contact@lamicroforests.com. I started an Instagram for LA Microforest with the hope that eventually we'll start getting other people to be able to us to share photos of other people's stuff. So it's not meant to be, LA Microforest is more of that like community hub for this kind of topic. It's not meant to be like my business. My business is Seed to Landscape. So you're also welcome to follow me on Instagram at Seed to Landscape, and contact me through that website or anything. So we can open it up to more questions, but that's it for my presentation.
I have 2 questions. Can you hear me?
They want to verbalize it.
And that is Janine something. So we want to recognize her. We can do that.
Jenica.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, great. I have 2 questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
One is, and I know that you could probably find this out on the website, but I'm wondering if offhand you can tell us what the smallest plot of land you could do this on?
I would say very smallest, and you would eliminate one layer because you would only do one tree, would be a 10 by 10.
You
Like
can
a
do this
100
on a 10 by 10.
a
And
single, I would say one single oak tree, about 4 of your sub trees, and then about 8 or 9 of the perennials or smaller shrubs. And that would be the smallest you could possibly go. Otherwise, 125 square feet, 150 square feet is another more comfortable small size.
okay, and is this recorded so that, because I don't have good use of my hands and I don't know that I'll remember those numbers.
This is recorded, from my understanding, and
Will it be on
accessible.
will it be on YouTube or somewhere?
On our website.
It's going to be on the website and or the
Okay.
CNPS chapter's YouTube.
Okay, great. And then my second question was on the first forest that you showed us in Griffith Park, when the path was obliterated, when those trees get taller, will you or could you do some limbing up to restore? So it would seem like it would be magical if you could restore a pathway through the middle of that forest.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do anything you want. So the general, the original Miyawaki method was a very hands-off thing where it was like, even if something dies or some limb falls, you leave it, you don't touch it. So it's meant to be kind of like a maintenance-free thing. However, you can do whatever you want. If you want to prune it, you want to reopen the pathway. I would just in the future redesign it for the next one and just make sure the pathway is much wider, just so that I didn't have to do that kind of stuff. But yes, a little bit of pruning wouldn't be bad. And in fact, if you were to do pruning, the best thing would be to chop all those pieces up as small as you can and then leave it on the forest floor. So it could still stay in the forest and just decompose.
Right, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Question in the back. Yes.
The nice thing about birding is you go around to a lot of parks in LA and see different parks, and I've been to Betty Davis Park and looking for eastern beef. But at the time I was there, I noticed just a lot of grass and non-native plants. I don't know what organization was keeping up the park. Did you get any blowback from them, or have you been embraced by all the organizations that have had anything to do with the park?
Is it with, you notice the grass at the project site of the microforest?
Project site, but just the whole park area. I was looking around and I thought, why are they planting these non-native plants, you know?
I think one of the person is asking, for those of you on Zoom, that there were a lot of non-native species and things that were planted throughout the particular park, from the first microforest, and whether or not there was an embracing of the project that we're doing or some blowback because of the kind of project that we're doing. I was very fortunate that I got to do the project under the kind of wing of the LA Parks Foundation, which is a nonprofit that has been supporting the LA Park system for a very long time. So that relationship has always been like very positive between that organization and the LA City Parks. And so as a result, there was a very open-minded, open-hearted kind of embracing of the project that we started there, and a lot of that kind of like green light and helpful, assistance and support. Even though I'm not working for them anymore, I still see quite a bit of that support. And in fact, the Ascot Hills project is also under the LA City Parks, and they've been very supportive in helping to make that possible and happen as well. So I don't know if it's just because I've worked under and with some of those people like on the inside, if that kind of like familiar, like more relationship building quality is making some of those organizations more receptive to the idea. But I will say we haven't had anything negative. The most resistance we experienced was not actually from the parks, but actually it was originally from some of the neighbors concerned about that site becoming a place where people were going to start encamping or something like that. But all it took was a wonderful, walk along the LA River with some of those concerned citizens, and we talked about it and smoothed everything over, and it was just really nice. So I would say we didn't have any blowback about the project, but you have different, and it's something systemic that I'd love to see happen more and more within all governments, not all departments, the LA City Parks, every sanitation, everybody being able to plant with that more ecological mind. And I think these kinds of pilot projects that get people excited and showcase it and showcase what's possible, and then hopefully get really good scientific data off of it, those are the jumping off points that enable more to happen. Yeah.
A few things from the chat. Several people saying thank you and wonderful presentation and exciting projects. One person with regards to the fire department,
yes,
was mentioning Greg Rubin has given talks regarding native plants and misguided fire department brush clearance directives.
Yeah,
and posted that. So that's
Greg Rubin's been very, very fantastic in his work with regards to, and also has done so many landscapes that have undergone fire, and literally, like, if you had created for scientific experiments, like a native landscape that's watered a certain way, and you wanted to demonstrate fire, like his landscapes have gone through that, and he has documentation about it. So it's very, very cool. And yeah, I think we just need more people talking about it. And yeah.
And then now Tomrose asks, where can we find the volunteer opportunities you mentioned earlier? And this is also thank you for the long stem buckwheat that we gave me the other day at the T22 festival.
Oh,
It
nice.
was immediately swamped by pollinators in my backyard when I bought it.
Yay, nah, that's awesome. Hello. That's so cool. Yay. So the volunteer, you're welcome to just send me an email at contact@lamicroforests.com and just ask to be on a volunteer list, and I'll just make sure that when a blast goes out, you're on that. The other thing you can do is to just also follow me on Instagram and follow Northeast Trees on Instagram, because we often post when there's going to be a new volunteer event. And if it's a big, community volunteer event, they will also post it on their website. So Northeast Trees, myself, at Seed to Landscape probably, and also just email me and I'll loop you in. Thank you.
Are you using any of these principles for the wildlife option?
So somebody asked if any of these principles are being used for the wildlife crossing project. So I'm not part of the design team for that. So that's something that is probably a question for the design team. So I'm just growing the plants. But I do know a lot of really great thought and a lot of partnerships amongst all the partners, including the National Park Service and MRC, and everything has been brought into the design process, the plant selection process, and all of that. And so I could say that it's, from my eyes, a very ecologically sound kind of plan.
Someone also asks, for the Ascot Hills project, are there plans to hand water in the summer?
Yeah, so the question about hand watering, so that one's going to be tricky. So it does have a hose bib nearby enough that we can run several hoses, but the possibility of hand watering with one person, it would take, I calculated, about a whole day to water. And so our attempt is going to be to have impact sprinklers on tripods, maybe in each quadrant, that are watering it in that way. And we are planting in the fall, not in the summer. So hopefully they will have gotten a good enough head start by the time summer comes around that won't have to be very, very often that we do that. Any other questions? We have a question in the back. Oh, good question. Somebody asked if any non-native wildlife use the Griffith Park. We had some tree squirrels, the eastern fox squirrels, but not that many, because they're mostly, that park has a lot of, it's turf grass and trees. And so the tree squirrels are in those big trees already, and they're not venturing as much into the microforest. There were non-native insects, and native insects, they were all using it. Trying to think if there was anything other noticeable non-native wildlife. I don't know that I noticed many other things than that. No bullfrogs, yeah, just western toads that I saw. Yes, another question?
The Griffith Park project seems like a great precedent to change the art in the future.
Somebody said the Griffith Park project would be a good precedent for the Taylor Yard project. I think, yes. I mean, I would love to see more of this in so many different contexts and environments, whether it's LA River restoration projects, whether it's park restoration, and it's not a one size fits all. And so I hope that my excitement in talking about it is not some implication that every corner of the world should be this way. Like, no, there are so many scenarios where this is not going to be applicable, or it's not going to work, or it's too dense, or it's too, if you need clear sight lines for some reason, whether it's for security or whatever, this is not ideal. If you want to block your nudist neighbors, this is really ideal. I was working at the sales yard at Theodore Payne, and I had a customer come up to me. This was before I knew about microforests, so I couldn't tell them about that. But they specifically asked for a plant that would grow fast and be bushy so that they can plant it to block out their neighbors who go to the jacuzzi naked every day. So I gave them a Ray Hartman and told them to go, and good luck. But yes, I would love to see. So that's part of the goal of what we're doing. We're piloting all these projects, demonstrating success and or figuring out what doesn't work so that the next one we can make sure is successful. And people, departments, organizations, and hopefully be able to apply this in different situations as sound buffers, as freeway projects, as river restoration, like all of it. So yes, I would love to see that.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you guys.